there. So, all right. So I
Friends
just,
of the Delaware, probably the friends of the upper Delaware River.
yep. All right. So I've hit record. So we're recording now. Thank you so much for joining me.
Good to
And
be here.
so we're here to talk about the latest coronavirus stimulus package that passed DC.
Yes.
I'll start with a fairly broad question. What do you want your constituents to know about this package? What's your main takeaway from it that you want people to know about?
Well, I think the first thing I'd like folks to know is that it's very significant. It is the biggest stimulus package in the country's history, and it's a bipartisan bill. And so I think it's important as we hope to instill confidence and maybe a little bit of calm amongst folks out there across the political spectrum that the government is working and that we got something done of significance. So that just as a general point is something I would like to sort of impress upon folks. The other pieces are more specific, but very important. You know, we want to make sure we directed relief to individuals on the ground who are hurting, maybe unemployed, or trying to figure out how to work part-time, you know, and pay their bills still. So having direct payments, as we do for families, is important. The unemployment insurance expansion piece, where we really make sure we can cover 100% of wage loss. And add 13 more weeks beyond what the state provides in terms of benefits. That's a big development. So really expanding the pot, and then not just making it longer, but more eligibility for folks. So if you're a gig worker, if you're a part-time worker, you know, all of these individuals, independent contractors, are all eligible for unemployment insurance. And then there's two other buckets: small business and family farms. So for small businesses, we got 27,000 in New York, 19, including self-employed. We were able to craft a bill, I was out of my office, that would forgive automatically up to 6 months any current or future SBA loans that small business owners are in or will enter into. So if you already have loans on your books, those future payments that are owed on those loans automatically waived. The government pays for those. So that's a big deal. We were able to get that done. The other piece is a paycheck forgiveness program, where if small businesses are able to apply for a loan, those loans will turn into grants so long as they maintain their employee level. So the only thing you got to do is just maintain your employee level. You get the revenue, you can pay your employees, and you can maintain your business through this difficult time. And then there's disaster relief as well, up to $10,000 per small business. And again, this is for ESOPs, this is for self-employed, this is for sole proprietors, mid-sized and small businesses. And then the last piece are small and mid-sized local producers or farmers. Big part of my work is helping those folks out. In my district, we have 5,000. Vast majority are small family farms. So I was able to secure $9.5 billion in disaster assistance aid to our farmers. And by the way, our farmers are also eligible for those paycheck forgiveness business loans that I spoke about earlier. So those are the buckets that I would want to focus on, that I think are all applicable to the folks here in upstate.
Now let's expand a little bit on the aid to farmers. I know you're very active working with farm groups in your district. Help people to understand the ways in which they're hurting right now. Obviously, people are still eating, so in some ways the food distribution system is still operating. But tell me how, in particular, this current crisis is impacting these small and mid-sized farms.
Right. Well, it's two ways. One, it's shrinking the market. So if you are a specialty crop producer, you know, apples, fruits, vegetables, and you sell your goods or your product at farmers markets, for example, well, you're in trouble because you no longer have the ability to do that given the current CDC and New York State Health Department guidelines, right? People are not gathering together in that fashion. So, you know, how you can help fill the gap there, where you have so many of these local producers who provide essential services to the community, unable to allocate those to whether it's schools or farmers markets or even restaurants, right? Restaurants who are relying on local producers. You know, all of these opportunities are being swallowed up by the fact that the business is not open. So how do we make sure that we are helping these farmers continue to produce and to the extent they're able to deliver the product, redirect it to the places where we know it can be utilized, but at the very least keep them sustainable throughout this process. And that's what the assistance will do on the disaster front. The other piece that's important too, though, is the workforce component. With H-2A programs in particular, when you have the guest worker program, which was already sort of in a tough spot before this pandemic struck in terms of the effectiveness and sort of too clunky, this is making it even more difficult because now you have a backlog of folks who are trying to manage their way through this system, and all the red tape is making it all the more complicated. So you have farmers and farm operators who are going without a workforce. So we actually wrote a letter to the State Department, Mike Pompeo, and we asked him, myself and along with other colleagues, we said, we got to figure out a way to streamline this process, waive some of the requirements for interviews, and make it easier for folks to kind of get through the red tape. So I'm happy to report that they were receptive to that letter, and I've since made some adjustments. So now, if you've come here before as a guest worker, you don't have to sit for an interview. And this goes back to 4 years. So it's an easier way for folks to come and become part of the workforce without having that backlog keep building.
Right. How reliant would you say farms in your district are on some of these seasonal, dare I say, migrant workers?
Very. They're essential. They're in the thousands. We're talking about on a consistent basis, and they're annual. They come every year. I was 25 some odd farms in 2019, and just about every farm I visited, had a story about a seasonal worker that they've been with for years and years and years. So and the complaints were already in place about how difficult it is to bring them back, and the work that has to be done before you can clear. So you can imagine if it was already problematic before the coronavirus, how complicated it's become since.
Yeah. Must be a lot of anxiety out there on the part of small business owners, especially those in, say, the retail or service sectors, where because of social distancing, they're in many cases, not all, but in many cases, it's not a work from home scenario like other industries, perhaps. As well as anxiety on the part of their employees, and
yes,
them, those owners aren't in a position necessarily to carry them, and now they have to be on unemployment. What are you hoping that this package does? What are you hoping that you can say and your colleagues can say to try and alleviate some of that anxiety?
Well, I think the package does speak to that anxiety in a very direct fashion, specifically when we think about the grant program that was created to help generate revenue. Right now, the issue for these small businesses is that they can't generate revenue, right? The demand is not what it once was for whatever their goods or services may have been. And so the question is, how do you supplement that, or how do you cover the void or make up the gap that's been created by this dynamic? And so by pumping in loans that ultimately could become grants, so there's no interest tied to it, and you don't got to pay them back so long as you maintain your workforce, which means you just take those grants and then utilize them to continue to pay your workforce and maintain your operating costs, right? That allows these businesses to at least sustain themselves through this difficult time. Now, the question is trying to figure out how long this has to last, but if it's a month, 2 months, 3 months, if we can continue to provide these types of grants, so long as they're able to pay their employees on those conditions, then that revenue, in effect, is what they're missing, right? That revenue allows them to remain operational. Now, the profit margins might not be what they were, but in terms of just being able to sustain operation, that's important. And why is that important? It's important because at the end of this process, once we finally make it through, and we will make it through, we want the economy to be able to jumpstart. We don't want to have to remake the economy. We don't want to build up businesses from scratch. And so if we're able to maintain businesses throughout this process, and then finally we get through, we can go back out there, engage in the world, no more self-isolation, then you already have ready-made, businesses that are operating, their employees are ready to go, and you can start right back up again. And that's a huge cost saver right there just for the economy itself. The sooner we can get back on track, the better. And then the other two pieces that I mentioned before, the disaster loans that are specific for businesses that can tie their operating costs or whatever they're getting hit with to the actual effect of the coronavirus. These are quick turnaround loans, up to $10,000, that are meant to be fast in the turnaround time within 3 days, and to be immediate in terms of the relief they provide. And then again, my SBA loan forgiveness program, I think, is great too, because it automatically waives those payments. The business owner has to do nothing. There's nothing that needs to be done by the business owner to get the benefit of this waiver. It's already in effect. You will see it on your books. The payments that were owed for the next 6 months will be gone. So that is a big development that does not require any sort of effort on the part of the small business owner.
That's great. All right, I'd like to ask you a question. I'm curious about how you're personally getting on professionally, I should say, with what's going on here. How has this impacted your ability to do your job representing your district? What's it like down in DC? I know I've heard a number of people sort of wondering why it is that members of Congress are still congregating and such. Are you guys able to practice safe social distancing while you're at the Capitol? Just give us a little sense of how much your life has changed.
Well, it's changed like everybody else's quite a bit. We have twin boys, 6-year-old twins, my wife and I, and they're home from school like other parents, with to figure out how to manage that reality when childcare now is on us 100% every day. And so that's just the reality in and of itself that all families are going through. And on top of that, to your point, I'm trying to balance what goes on in DC with what's happening here in the district. Most of us now are back in our districts. We go back to Washington if it's required. For instance, we had to go back to vote on the CARES Act. But to be honest with you, there wasn't really any need to go back except for the need that maybe somebody was going to request a recorded vote. Because of that uncertainty, we all had to come back because we had to make sure that we could vote. We might not be in that place again, who knows? But yes, we're always ready, and I'm always standing ready to go back to DC to vote for whatever packages are coming, because we could do the conference calls, the caucus calls, talk about all the different dynamics of the package from our homes. But you got to vote, at least as of right now, in DC. So I'm home like other Americans across the country, and I'm balancing the work life. The other piece that I would say is, I used to do a lot of town halls, a lot of in-person town halls. I did 35 last year up to this point, up till February of this year. And, took a lot of pride in that and made a lot of connections with folks on the ground. And that's, it's hard to sort of not be able to have that type of connection. So we tried to replace that with weekly teletown halls now, just to make sure that we're at least able to get folks to dial in and I can address their questions and their concerns. I also have 4 local advisory groups, small business, ag, healthcare, and veterans. I try to do weekly calls with those individuals. And I have my team pull constituent cases, individuals who just want to, be heard and be listened to. And I want to make sure I call them up and hear from them and try to address their concerns. So I'm just trying to maintain that contact that has been challenged by the current dynamics.
Yeah. All right. So at this point, I'm good. Do you have any other things you'd like to add? I didn't think to ask.
I'm good.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for making time for me. And this will be in our newscast tonight at 6 and 11. And
Great.
Of course, on our website as well. So
Appreciate
thank you, and thanks to Margaret for setting this up.
I'll pass it along.
All right, bye-bye.
Stay safe.